at thericksmithshow.com.
We're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 18,000 Kaiser Permanente nurses are on strike in California. 600 RNs at two other California hospitals, Sutter Tracy and Watsonville General, are also striking. 400 more nurses at Providence Hospital in Washington, D.C. are striking today. The Kaiser nurses are in contract talks that have broken down. The erosion of patient big issue for the Kaiser nurses. Nurses in 16 states Wednesday will protest lack of proper Ebola preparation. National Nurses United is demanding proper Ebola preparation, training, and equipment, including full-body hazmat suits that meet the American Society for Testing Materials F-1670 standard for blood penetration, the F-1671 standard for viral penetration, and that leave no skin exposed or unprotected. National Nurses United's Roseanne DeMauro.
I want our policymakers, I want our hospitals to tell us which one will 100% protect our nurses, to protect the public. We want something where a virus cannot penetrate anywhere into the nurse's body, from head to toe. The fact is, the message the nurses across America are getting and have been given is that they're expendable. And I'll tell you, at first I think there was shock, and then I think there was anger, and now we're turning to dramatic action.
The UAW expects VW to officially recognize the union, with an announcement paving the way for that recognition coming as soon as this week. A letter to UAW Local 42 members from local president Mike Cantrell was leaked to both the AP and the Wall Street Journal. In the letter, Cantrell said the local is waiting for details from the company about the announcement. The local was formed despite the UAW having narrowly lost an NLRB election at the plant earlier this year. The UAW says more than half the workers at that plant have now signed up. The leaked letter said the UAW expects VW recognition based on discussions in Germany last spring. The VW announcement is supposed to be a policy change. UAW recognition. The UAW and VW reportedly agreed last spring that the company would recognize the union. The union agreed to help win production of a new SUV at the Chattanooga plant and to drop its NLRB challenge over the earlier election. The Take Back Chicago Coalition rallied Tuesday and marched to the Chicago Board of Trade to call for action on economic initiatives supported by Chicago voters. The activists want state lawmakers to pass an Illinois minimum wage of $10.65, a $15 an hour City of Chicago minimum wage that includes domestic and tipped workers, an elected representative school board to give Chicago parents a real voice in education, and immediate reform of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. So I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. Bad trade deals, baseball bat wielding bullies. We've got it all. And I can't wait to get to it. Lots of things. And the more I talk about trade, the more conversations I have with folks, since this is the Stop Fast Track week of action, the hope is that the more we talk about this Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade agreement, which wholly negotiated behind closed doors with 600 quote unquote trade advisors. Those are the folks we used to call high-paid lobbyists, high-paid corporate lobbyists. Let me be very, very crystal clear on that. The more response I'm getting back from people, that visceral reaction that I've been talking about, that I haven't seen, or I haven't thought I've been seeing, I'm seeing. People get it. The NAFTA style trade agreements, bad. Nothing good about that. Of the hundreds of emails that I've gotten on this, I've yet to get one of someone going, NAFTA was a good thing. Because you can't even make the argument that NAFTA was a good thing for the people in Mexico. You can't. And you look at what it's done to our immigration policy. I say NAFTA and our trade policy there, that's what's caused this mass flood of immigration. And if we don't get our trade deals right, if we don't go back and fix the bad ones, how can we move forward? And that's the question that I'm going to continue to ask as we finish out this week, as we continue to have people from different groups talking about the work that they're doing and why they think this is not such a great idea. I think it's important. I'm surprised that I haven't seen more coverage. What the mainstream media has been focusing on is, there was the techie thing. We've opened up China to the tech world. I got to wonder about that. And now the climate change thing, gotta wonder about what the details in that are. And I'm sure in the coming weeks and months, probably in years, we'll figure it out. But these are the questions our media should be asking more of. Not just being the stenographer, but actually going out and asking some very tough questions. And we're going to talk to folks today to bring up some of those things, along with talking about the Pennsylvania legislature today electing their leadership for the coming year. So we're going to find for the coming 2 years. So we'll find out what the next 2 years are going to look like based on who they have chosen to be their leadership. So that should be quite interesting. But yesterday was Veterans Day. I'm kind of shocked at the response, and I guess I shouldn't be. To Bruce Springsteen singing at the concert for Valor last night on the National Mall. They sang Creedence Clearwater Revival's "Fortunate Son," and the right wing went ballistic. Wow, that's an anti-war song, and I've always thought of that as a class war song. To where and I don't. And again, I guess it comes back to this idea that, and my wife reminds me constantly that I'm one of the few people who actually listen to the words and try and figure out the meaning. It was because when we first started dating, there were songs she would sing as we're driving around. And I'd go, that's a child molester song, right? No, have you ever heard the song "My Sharona"? She's singing along and she's singing the right words. I'm going, have you ever thought about what that means? And I'm that kind of person. I want to know what the thought behind it was, why it was. And "Fortunate Son" to me was really about. It wasn't as much an anti-war song as it was an anti-class war song. That these poor kids were being sent off to fight these wars, and the rich kids, well, they get to go into the Air National Guard. And, you can look at this and point it right at George W. Bush. And I remember when all of this run-up was coming to a head, when we were going to go in the first time to Iraq. Now I guess we're going back, the third time now? Fourth now, because we had the initial, the big surge, and now I guess we're back, and you throw that on top of the one in the 90s, and now you're in there 4 times. It really, I thought, was generally thought of as an anti-class war thing. Well, why should my kid go off and bleed and die and fight for these stuff and have their lives ruined when the senator's kid doesn't have to go, or the at the time the House of Representatives kid, or the head of the CIA, or so on. The thought for me, the thought is, they should be the first ones. If you're that 100% behind it, your kids first. And if globally we had a policy of your kids first, maybe we wouldn't have these kind of wars, and maybe those people in the audience wouldn't be veterans. I'm often amazed on Veterans Day, and that we just that one day a year we heap all this praise on them. And I thought about it last night. We must really love veterans because we seem to like to make a lot of them. To me, I wish we didn't have to celebrate a Veterans Day, because then we wouldn't have had all of the war and all of the things that put them in that. I mean, it's just a thought. I think, and this is where I think why Bruce Springsteen probably threw it in there. And the fake news on Fox people, I was watching some clips earlier, just losing their mind. How dare they? How dare he sing that song? It's not right that he actually have something critical to say about what was going on there. And, it kind of reminded me, you go back to the Reagan years when they used to play Springsteen's Born in the USA. And I at the time remember it. And I remember, going, that's not a rah-rah song. That is a very critical song of the policies. And the best critique of the song I've ever heard was written by a guy named Grell Marcus. And I hadn't seen this in a while. And I was looking at an article over at Think Progress, and they had this critique on there. And the guy wrote Born in the USA about the refusal of the country to treat Vietnam veterans as something more than non-union workers in an enterprise conducted off the books. It is about the debt the country owes to those who suffered the violation of the principles on which the country was founded, and on which the country was founded, and by which it was justified that it would serve ever since. Given that, you think back to this and you go, yeah, I mean, just imagine that thought that this was a bunch of non-union workers in an off the books enterprise that, nobody was going to admit to, but somebody was going to profit from. And they did. And I look at this and I look at the crazy right wing. And it's just very twisted to me that, they're going to wear their red, white, and blue and pat these folks on the back, but still continue to want to push them into becoming veterans. And that all of this outrage to me just kind of stuck with me. And today was just a weird day for me because, I'm thinking about this Fox News stuff and all of these conservative tweets that I'm reading. And I'm going, you should be ticked off at the guy who put him in this mess, but they're really not. Also on the war front, since yesterday was Veterans Day, today back in 1885, George Patton was born, old blood and guts himself. Also today in 1918, it was the end of World War I. And you think about what we eventually did to those folks. When they marched on Washington to try and get some help during the Depression, when the Bonus Army marched into Washington, and they were crushed by the MacArthurs and the Eisenhower military at the time, had their tents burned down and were thrown out of the city. Kind of makes me go, well, at least we treat our veterans a little bit better today. Also today in 1921 was the dedication of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or the Tomb of the Unknowns as it was called then. And also today, 1942, the draft age was lowered to 18. So there you go. Very interesting stuff, if you will. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was me, you and me. As I was walking that ribbon highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw the rolling, that golden valley. This land was me, you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is Your World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, the leaders of Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. The High Court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan into South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan in 2011. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WFP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we would rely less on the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. President Obama called on the Federal Communications Commission to adopt the, quote, strongest possible rules to protect net neutrality. But on Fox Business's Varney and Company, host Stuart Varney and Fox News legal analyst Andrew Napolitano accused the president of seeking to regulate the internet.
He wants to regulate the internet the way he's regulated
Surprise,
cable.
surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise.
You know, for them to call it net neutrality is Orwellian
It's nonsense.
tight because it is not neutral. It is not neutral. He basically wants to take the choice of buyers and sellers out of the market
And down go the cable companies.
But net neutrality, when Napolitano deemed Orwellian, is actually the guiding principle that the internet's founders have called fundamental to the internet's success. In fact, according to Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, quote, democracy involves people being informed, being able to communicate, being able to hold each other accountable. And all that absolutely depends on the neutral internet. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Standing tall against the multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
All the things you want are real. You have you to complete, and there is no deal.
Yes, stand if you can. Jump up and down, scream and holler, do something, because we're going to need it. The next 2 years, I think, are going to be very entertaining from this seat. But I got to tell you, as a taxpayer of the Commonwealth, I don't know that it's going to be all that great. And on the national level, I don't know that it's going to be that much better. But today, it appears that both the Democrats and the Republicans here on the state level have nominated and elected their their leadership. And I think it says an awful lot about the direction that I think we're going to go in the next 2 years. Here to talk a little bit about that is our good friend, attorney Irwin Aronson. Irwin, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be here, Rick.
So I understand on the Democratic side, they've come to basically the same folks they had last term around, correct?
Well, in the Senate, yes, with one change. Senator Kosunik from out in the western part of the state had retired and didn't seek re-election. So his seat is his position as the policy chair in the caucus will change, but the Senate floor leadership among the Democrats will be Senator Costa as the minority leader and Senator Williams from Philadelphia as the minority whip and Senator Hughes from Philadelphia as the Democratic chair of the Appropriations Committee. So that top leadership changes. Senator Wayne Fontana from Allegheny County was elected the caucus chair, and that's a replacement of Senator Kosunik that I mentioned. And Senator Lisa Boscola will remain as the Senate Democratic Policy Committee chair on that side of the aisle, and Senator Larry Farnese and John Hijacks and John Blake will also become members of the leadership team for the first time. Senator Farnese is going to be the caucus secretary, and he's going to be replacing Senator Tina Tartaglione, also from Philadelphia. And that spot as caucus secretary is going to be responsible, among other things, for managing Governor-elect Wolf's gubernatorial appointments through the various boards and agencies and through the Senate. So that's significant. And Senator Hijacks is going to become the caucus administrator. He will be replacing Senator Fontana, who, as I indicated, moved up. And finally, Senator Blake was appointed by the caucus as the Democratic vice chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator Blake is from up in the Scranton area. So that's sort of the lineup, if you will, of the Senate Democratic floor leadership in the upcoming session. So that's that. The big news is a big change and a challenge on the Republican side of the Senate floor leadership. Senator Joe Scarnati was nominated to be the president pro tem of the Senate again. That is a nomination from his caucus, but won't become final until the full Senate reconvenes in January, because as a Senate officer, as opposed to being a caucus officer, that has to be voted on by the full Senate. And as president pro tem, Senator Scarnati, as is in the current case, will be responsible for appointing the chairs and members of every standing committee in the Senate and play a significant role in legislative negotiations with both the administration and the House of Representatives. The new lineup includes Senator Jay Corman as majority leader, replacing Senator Dominic Pileggi. Senator Corman is from the Center County area, and Senator Pileggi was from out in Delaware County. That will mean that not only is there a new floor leader for the Republicans in the Senate, but he also becomes the chair of the Senate Rules and Executive Nominations Committee. And that plays a key role not only in floor debates, but in also setting what is the calendar, what is the agenda for which the Senate will be called upon to vote on both legislation and executive nominations, and plays, of course, a major role in the administration negotiations to the degree that takes place, and in negotiations with the House of Representatives. Senator Corman, who's replacing Senator Pileggi as majority leader, previously served as Senate Appropriations Committee chair. He is now going to be replaced by Senator Pat Brown from out in the Lehigh Valley, who will be the new chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and that is a crucial player in the activity of, among other things, making the state's budget and setting the budget's priorities. Senator John Gordner has now been elected majority whip, replacing Senator Brown in that role. And Senator Gordner is from the 27th district. That's up in the north central part of the state, up toward the Danville, Bloomsburg area. And Senator Bob Mensch will be the Republican caucus chair. And as Republican caucus chair, he presides over Republican caucus meetings when they discuss bills and amendments and developing their caucus strategy. And finally, the caucus secretary for the Republicans in the Senate will be Senator Richard Alway, who's from down in the Franklin County area.
So what does that mean as we look to the new legislative session, and what, since the Republicans control the both the Senate and the House, what does that mean for policy? What does that mean for the new for Governor-elect Wolf?
Well, it means a number of things. First of all, it means there was something of a coup in the Senate Republican caucus by replacing Senator Pileggi, who has been the Republican floor leader in the Senate for a number of years. There appears, at first blush at least, to be an ascendancy of some of the more right-wing conservative Tea Party types who had been announcing over the last several weeks that they believed that Senator Pileggi had kept a number of pieces of legislation that were particularly anti-people and anti-worker from being voted on the floor. And it appears as if they've been successful in replacing him, although Senator Corman, who is his replacement, is certainly not, or has not demonstrated, at least during his time in the Senate, both as a Senate member and as chair of the Appropriations Committee, a particular penchant for attacking or assaulting workers. He was supportive, for example, of the transportation legislation that has created a lot of jobs in Pennsylvania. But it certainly appears as if a major leader and a major dominant force in Pennsylvania government and policy has been toppled, and how that's going to play out moving forward is yet to be seen.
So, in looking at this, could you make an argument that the letter over the summer that was leaked, and now more recently the comments of we're going to bring a baseball bat to the legislative caucuses, that Scott Wagner has seen something of a victory on his side?
I think that there's a reasonable argument that is indeed the case. I mean, first and foremost, there are people like me who go to the Senate chamber, and I must confess to you, Rick, that I am physically scared of this guy announcing that he's going to bring a baseball bat into the Senate chamber. Is frightening. If I were a shrinking violet, I would be more than frightened, because he has demonstrated a penchant for hyperbolic conduct in the past. Remember, this is the same guy who on the floor in the well of the Senate and in the Capitol Rotunda and in both print and electronic media announced his view that labor leaders were like Adolf Hitler. That ultimately made its way into a television commercial that I saw during the election campaign with several World War II heroes who fought Hitler in no less than the Battle of the Bulge, were incensed by Senator Wagner referring to them as Hitler, or akin to Hitler, or like Hitler, or anything of the kind. And certainly to the Jewish community, that was a very seriously offensive assertion as well. Now, weeks later, in an interview on no less than a Philadelphia-based radio station, Senator Wagner announced that he was carrying a baseball bat into the Senate chamber in his self-anointed role as watchdog. So that's scary. But an equally scary reality is that there are three new members of the Senate Republican caucus who have not been sworn into the Senate, but did get to participate in today's elections. Two from the southwestern part of the state and one from the eastern part of the state. And in at least two of those instances, from my review of campaign finance records, Senator Wagner and Senator Wagner's personal political action committee had contributed significant amounts of money to defeat, in one instance, a Democratic incumbent, Senator Tim Soloway, and in another instance, to defeat a Democratic candidate in an open seat that was open because of a name I mentioned earlier in this conversation, Senator Kucinich, Rich Kucinich, who retired, and a woman named Carmen Bartolotta was the beneficiary of some extraordinary largesse, particularly late in the campaign, from Senator Wagner. It looks as if in the Bartolotta seat, and Senator-elect Bartolotta is the individual that beat Senator Soloway out there. it appears as if Senator Wagner gave her a personal contribution of $45,000 and an additional roughly $400,000 plus from his private political action committee that he runs, and within the last several days, right before the election. So, I mean, there sounds as if there is a purchase of democracy being made by a particular wing in the Republican Party, and those votes, I certainly was not inside the caucus, so I have no idea how people voted, but one can guess that these new senators from the Southwest, who were the beneficiaries of Senator Wagner's largesse, were grateful at the time Senator Wagner was engaged in a campaign to unseat Senator Pileggi from his position as the majority leader in the Republican Senate caucus.
And by grateful, you mean beholden to, because I would have to argue if you give someone $400,000, there's got to be a string attached to it somewhere.
Well,
I don't believe in benevolency. Nothing's free.
Well, I will probably, for the purpose of this broadcast, reserve my own opinions. The facts are as I've laid them out. People need to draw their own conclusions. But one wonders why a putative proponent of open and good, transparent government, as Senator Wagner likes to characterize himself, would be engaged at that level in that fashion. Why the people of southwestern Pennsylvania wanted to elect a senator from York County is a curious question for me.
And I look at this and, I go back to all of the stuff that we teach our kids about bullying. And, I look at the comment about a baseball bat, and I look at some of the other things that have gone on. And the only word that I can come up as a descriptive word for the esteemed senator is a bully. I mean, it appears to me that there are some arm twisting going on here, and some, in my view, threatening.
Well, I get it. I hear what you're saying. And I'm a lawyer. I deal in a world of facts. And the facts are as I have outlined them.
Right. So let me ask you this: Can he legally bring a baseball bat into the caucus chambers?
I don't know. I know he's not permitted to bring a gun or a knife, weapon grade knife, and those are very specifically not permitted in the Capitol building. Baseball bat, I don't know whether that's on the list or not, but it's certainly scary, and particularly scary in the context of Senator Wagner being among the advocates of legislation that would criminalize protected labor conduct, federally protected labor conduct under the National Labor Relations Act, that he, among others, have sought to criminalize. And here I hear that he wants to bring a baseball bat into the Senate chamber. I take it seriously.
As we all should.
I don't see that as a euphemistic joke. I see that as a serious and meaningful, menacing type of threat.
And
That's
I'm right there with you.
Take it.
That's how I took it when I saw it as well. This wasn't. I don't think that he, being in the position that he is, says things off the cuff. I believe that they're measured, and they're measured in a way to elicit a response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too, and it's more than just the shock value. For someone who's been in the Senate a very short time, only a few months, having won a special election, now reelected certainly in last Tuesday's election, it seems to be a peculiar ascendancy, and there must be some relationship between this enormous expenditure of money and the ascendancy.
Yeah, because you got to wonder. You got to wonder how much of that throughout the past has been part of this as well. I mean, he's been a huge donor, as I understand, and has been reported for quite some time. And again, I go back to where the money came from. It came from we, the taxpayers. That's what the frustrating thing is. All the while attempting to destroy what is ours.
Well, it's a curious thing. I mean, Senator Wagner has clearly indicated in various comments that I have read or that have been interpreted to me, that he really is not very much of a fan of government. Yet we know that the trash hauling company from which he has apparently earned his significant, or at least reportedly significant income over many years is one that deals in a world of exclusive monopolistic municipal contracts for trash hauling. So in many respects, he is more of a financial beneficiary of government and government decisions than almost anyone I've ever heard of, and nonetheless holds this enmity toward government and government agencies that doesn't reconcile, at least in my simple mind, with that reality, that factual matrix.
So last question I've got for you, in looking at these appointments and these elections, how does this bode for the coming year? Because one of my fears is we end up here in Harrisburg, here in Pennsylvania, much like the national scene, where nothing gets done because you have this ideological gridlock.
Well, it's certainly a potential danger. I can only comment that there are some lessons to be learned from a few things. I mean, one is that very clearly the citizens of Pennsylvania expressed two things in the election last week. One is the low voter turnout, demonstrating a feeling of overarching frustration on the part of the voting age population in this state with both political parties. And if people in the Capitol building don't learn a lesson from that, they're making a mistake that I think that they will rue in coming election cycles. The second is no one ever should underestimate Tom Wolf. Tom Wolf is an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary leader, a thinker and a doer, someone who understands complex issues and can synthesize complex issues very handily, and is willing to reach across divides to hear alternatives and ideas and concepts, and willing also to go over the head of virtually anybody who is simply obstructionist and speak directly to the people of Pennsylvania. And I think that we need to wait and we need to watch and we need to see who's learned what, and we need to see what kind of leader Governor Wolf will be. And then we can more readily answer those questions. It's at this juncture far too early to guess. Certainly there are implications both in the Senate Republican leadership and in the soon-to-be announced House Republican leadership that implies, some intransigence, but there are lessons to be learned, as I said, from last Tuesday's election, and there are lessons to be learned from a very new and different kind of leader that Pennsylvania hasn't seen in a number of decades in Tom Wolf, who's just an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary thinker, and an extraordinarily high integrity, highly purposed human being.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch, and I wish him nothing but the best. But my assessment is today just made his job a little more difficult.
Yeah, I think that you could be right, and I think that we need to wait and see and watch closely. And there's a role in all of this for you and your listeners to play by, once we're done waiting and we get to start watching, to not be bashful about reaching out and speaking out on your show, in the emails to members of the General Assembly, in their phone calls, to their friends and neighbors and families, to the print media with letters to the editor and op-ed pieces, and to their organizations, their unions, and their fraternal clubs, their Rotaries, their Kiwanis, their Elks, Moose lodges, and things of that nature, their churches and synagogues and mosques, to keep these kinds of issues that we talk about so frequently, from education to taxation to workers' rights to job creation to meaningful transportation to meaningful energy policy, in the forefront of discussion in their communities and in their organizations, so that we can measure the conduct of members of our General Assembly against public policy decisions that the people desire.
And that's what we will keep our eye on. Irwin, it's always great talking with you. I appreciate your thoughts, your input. I look forward to talking to you again.
Look forward to being back next week. Take good care, my friend.
Thanks so much. Our good friend, attorney Irwin Aronson. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Station to station. Living in America.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
It's Tuesday, November 11, 2014.
Time is not on our side.
The final United Nations Climate Change Report.
We have the means to limit climate change and build a more prosperous, sustainable future.
Good news, there's still hope. Plus, flashback.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways.
To when conservatives accepted science.
Margaret Thatcher is a left-wing tree-hugging pinko. All of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The Environmental Committee, currently run Barbara Boxer, replaced by probably James Inhofe.
Yes, the global warming believer is out and the global warming skeptic is in. So finally, the Environmental Committee can focus on important issue like who's stealing all our polar bears?
Yeah, what about that? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, while we have been mired in the election over the past week or so, and looking forward to the U.S. Senate Environmental Committee being taken over by Senator James Inhofe, America's foremost climate change denier, there was something else going on at the UN, and of course, it was getting buried by the election.
Well, yeah, the United Nations released its final climate science report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2 days before the midterm elections. This report is more blunt than ever. The planet is warming. More than half is due to human activities, and the implications for the future are serious and require urgent action.
Climate change will leave no part of the world untouched by the impacts. Human influence on the climate system is clear. The more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts.
Severe, pervasive, and irreversible. That was the chairman of the IPCC, Rajendra Pachauri, at the press conference for the release of the report.
Or as we call him around here, Mr. Chuckles.
This is the IPCC scientists' final synthesis report, the culmination of 3 previous monster installments over the last year on the science of global warming, the impacts, and the solutions. The key warning, we've already burned 2/3 of the way through our carbon budget. That's the maximum amount of carbon we can burn if we want global temperatures to avoid going over 2 degrees Celsius. That's about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial temperatures.
And that's by just the end of the century, right? The goal is about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep it from going over that before the end of this century, right?
Right. The IPCC warns we must ramp down to zero emissions by 2100.
Zero emissions?
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Now, most importantly, according to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, there is hope.
The good news is that if we act now, immediately and decisively, we have the means to build a better and more sustainable world.
Now, the IPCC finds that we already have all of the technology we need, and action on climate change is much, much cheaper now than dealing with the consequences will be later.
We have all the technology we need to get to zero emissions by the end of the century?
Yes, we do. But time is running out, according to American scientist and IPCC author Dr. Michael Oppenheimer on CBS News.
We have a small window of opportunity the next couple of decades where we can slow this thing down and start to reverse the trend.
In other words, the longer we wait, the more difficult and the more expensive it will be. Now, to that end, final negotiations on an international emissions reduction treaty will occur in Paris in December 2015. And of course, any such treaty obviously doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of being ratified by a hostile Republican-controlled U.S. Senate.
Gosh, I wish we had warned people about that.
So, State Department negotiators are reportedly pursuing treaty mechanisms that don't require Senate approval.
Treaty mechanisms?
Yeah, like going through the Montreal Protocol, for example. That's the world's first international climate treaty to repair the ozone hole.
A treaty that has already been approved by the U.S. Senate.
Oh, yes. Finally, Saturday, November 8th, was the 25th anniversary of the very conservative British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's speech to the United Nations, urging action on climate change.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways. The problem of global climate change is one that affects us all, and action will only be effective if it's taken at the international level. There's no good squabbling over who is responsible or who should pay. Each country has to contribute, and those countries who are industrialized must contribute more to help those who are not.
And funny thing is, President Ronald Reagan agreed with her. That's the world we used to live in.
Of course, Thatcher's speech at the UN has gotten somewhat lost to history since the very next day, the Berlin Wall came down.
Yep.
For much more on all of our stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our twice-weekly reports anytime via iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
If I could turn back time, if I could find a way, I'd take back minimum wage. Yeah!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Boy, if that isn't the truth. And, we keep seeing that. And to me, this election, in the last segment, we're talking to Irwin about what this election meant. To me, this election should have been the call of, hey, we want to see wages rising. 4 conservative states, 4 red states voted to increase their minimum wage. I mean, that should have been the overarching message. And, hey, Democrats, there's a message you should be thinking about come next election cycle. Also giving people the ability to collectively bargain. And I was reading an article. Our quote of the day comes from the article written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the former Laker great, who wrote about the ability for athletes to in colleges to be able to engage in collective bargaining. He writes, without the power of collective bargaining, student athletes will have no leverage in negotiating for fair treatment. History has proven that management will not be motivated to do the right thing just because it's right. Unions aren't all perfect, but they have done more to bring about equal opportunities and break down class barriers than any other institution. And it's exactly what I've been saying from the beginning of the first message I put out on this program was, look, I'm a union guy. I believe in the power of democracy, of collective action, of we the people. And, as you see more and more of what's going on and the power shifting that's gone on over my entire lifetime, you just kind of have to, at some point you say, enough's enough. And, I look at this story from Seattle, where evidently a group of airlines and airline companies under the guise of Airlines for America. Gotta love that. Airlines for America. How could you be against Airlines for America? How could you possibly be against that? Evidently, they filed a suit in district court there in Seattle, claiming that the minimum wage hike that the city of SeaTac, Seattle Tacoma area that they passed is violating their it's in conflict with the state and federal law, and it's harming them. Airlines for America, they're American Airlines, Delta Airlines, United, UPS, FedEx. It's that group. They are the minimum wage there was going to be bumped up over a couple of year period up to $15 an hour. And they're claiming that, well, that's bad. Basically their argument, that's bad. And it claims it's going to harm them financially. And I'm going, wait a second, are you kidding me? And I found it interesting that another one of these groups, Baggage Airline Guest Services, They're an they're an airport contractor. They've filed in as well. They're the people who, I mean, we've privatized the bellhop at the curb. That is a private company that does that. The wheelchair escorts that you're supposed to tip, those are contract. They're not even airport workers anymore. This is what we've done to the commons. We've outsourced everything. We've privatized. We've contracted. We've shunned responsibility. And now what they're saying is, look, these people cannot make a living. They're going to the governments and asking for food stamps and rent assistance and all of these things. It's about damn time that employers pay what they're supposed to pay in wages so that their workers can make a decent living. And it takes me back to what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, not just about college students being able to negotiate whether they're going to be able to have a meal plan or not. It's about all workers. Without the power of collective bargaining, you can take out the student athlete and put in airport workers or McDonald's workers or fast food or retail or anything and put it into that student athlete block and say, without the power of collective bargaining, blank, put yourself in anywhere, will have no leverage to negotiate for fair treatment. None. And I love these people who say, well, I'll negotiate my own deal. I love this. As you know, I do a weekend trip because I like driving. It's one of these. It's a sickness. I think it's really a sickness, and it's one of those things I loved even as a young kid. I just loved driving, and the solitude and the mind clearing and be able to listen to music and just block everything else out. That's what I love about it. But on the weekends, I'll take a trip. And I was waiting at one place, and that's one of the things I'm glad I don't do. I'm not a truck driver for a living. The constant waiting and the delays and always trying to cheat you out of time. That again, back to the whole reason for collective bargaining. But I'm sitting across from this guy, and he's talking about how the company cheats them on wages because evidently they have two tiers, one for one account, one for another, and they're always trying to get him to take the lower rate account so that he's paid less money. And I go, but wait a second, that's why you contract. And I found it interesting that I'm listening to this conversation that this guy's having. And he's talking about, they're trying to cheat us, but I don't do it. I won't let them. I won't do it. And then he goes, I needed Saturday off. So I went in and I negotiated, and I got to switch my day from the day where I was making $24 an hour down to the day where I was making $18 an hour. And I'm going, well, how did you how'd that negotiation work for you? Well, I got what I wanted. Well, but you got screwed. You lost $6 an hour. Yeah, but I got the day off. And again, this is that kind of mentality, this very short-term tip of the nose thinking that has gotten us into a lot of these problems where you've got all of these people going, I'll make my own deal. And the problem is most of them are bad deals. So I look at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar saying, look, the reality is without that power of collective bargaining, without that ability to stand united, you've got no leverage. And you're basically screwed. So here they're trying to, and trust me, I believe the courts will overturn the law and make them lower the minimum wage. I do believe that's going to happen. That's just my personal opinion, my unqualified, not legal scholared opinion, but just the way things continue to go against working people. This is one opportunity to raise these folks' wages from the minimum wage up into something of maybe I can take care of myself. By 2017, the airport was going to raise wages up to $13 an hour. Because if you remember, and this is coming, it's one of those things, evidently, where the airport is, a court already struck down the $15 an hour minimum wage in the city of SeaTac. So the federal said, no, can't do it. That's out. So the Port Commission, the Port of Seattle, they've instituted a wage floor for people working there that in the upcoming year, January of 15, wages will go up to $11.22, and then up to $13 an hour in 2017. And the airlines are just losing their minds. And for me, it's one of those moments where you got to go, hey, here's reality. We've been getting screwed for far too long. And it's about time that workers get something. But again, you come back to this. Our dependence on these laws, our dependence on the only way we seem to think that we can do something is if we pass a law. And I've been saying for a long time, this is where we should be organizing. And I don't care what you call it. I don't care if you go back to calling them guilds. I don't care if you call them associations or unions or whatever. Eventually, we as a society have to come back together. And I look at our politics and how divided we are as a nation. This is by design. I try and reach out to a crazy conservative and say, look, there's got to be something we agree on. There's got to be a way that we move forward as a nation. We may not agree on abortion or gay marriage or guns or some of these things, but there are things that we do. And this is what I'm hoping come the next legislative session. The hope is that when Governor Wolf takes office, that this rightward shift of the entire Republican leadership, because that's what today was. That was a massive rightward shift. You have now taken the center right leadership and you've chucked them for far right leadership. And there are some in the Republican Party who can be thrilled with that because nothing's going to get done. No wins for that governor. And we're going to go after him. And you can hear it now. In fact, I get the emails from these crazy right-wing groups saying, well, we're going to make him a one-term governor because we're not going to let him do anything. We're not going to give him wins like we did with Rendell. And I'm scratching my head going, wait a second. If Wolf does well, the state does well. We all do well. This is the thing that's blown my mind about Obama. Corporate America is just tickled pink with Obama. His Wall Street has never been happier. Corporate America, never happier. He's doing their bidding with the free trade agreements. And yet, still nothing. It's about team sport mentality. And I'm telling you, it's about keeping us divided. It's about, really, honestly and truthfully, it's about each other's throats. Because if we're fighting constantly, if we're at each other's throats, if we're easily divided, well, we're easier to be picked off, right? Isn't that the whole thing? Divide and conquer. And I would have to argue, based on the election results and some of the weird comments, we're fairly divided. But I at some point, I do believe we have to figure out a way of bringing this back around, of agreeing on things that we can agree on and moving forward. But today, I'm concerned. And I agree with our guest, Irwin Aronson, who said, look, Tom Wolf is a brilliant guy. And I believe that he is. In my experiences and my conversations with him over the years, and I've known him for a number of years, he is a brilliant, thoughtful person. And the hope is that he is able to bridge that gap, find common ground, and move us forward. Now, the other part of this is we're going to have to figure out how to raise revenue. And taxing the drilling, I think, is the easiest of the lifts. I would like to see the Delaware loophole closed. I would like to see all of those corporations who are crying poverty because we're paying the highest rates in the world, who 3/4 of them pay nothing. I would like to see them pay their fair share. Just my thought. But it's going to be very interesting. I think the first couple months are going to be very telling on where the Republicans take the state house and take the state senate, where their policy mind takes them. If one of the first pieces of legislation you see come out is, hey, let's go screw those workers, it is going to be a long 2 years. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
7 families who lost 97 farms. I think about my grandpa, my neighbors, and my name. It's nice to feel like dying, like I
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 18,000 Kaiser Permanente nurses are on strike in California. 600 RNs at two other California hospitals, Sutter Tracy and Watsonville General, are also striking. 400 more nurses at Providence Hospital in Washington, D.C. are striking today. The Kaiser nurses are in contract talks that have broken down. The erosion of patient care is a big issue for the Kaiser nurses. Nurses in 16 states Wednesday will protest lack of proper Ebola preparation. National Nurses United is demanding proper Ebola preparation, training, and equipment, including full-body hazmat suits that meet the American Society for Testing Materials F-1670 standard for blood penetration, the F-1671 standard for viral penetration, and that leave no skin exposed or unprotected. National Nurses United's Roseanne DeMauro.
I want our policymakers, I want our hospitals to tell us which one will 100% protect our nurses, to protect the public. We want something where a virus cannot penetrate anywhere into the nurse's body, from head to toe. The fact is, the message the nurses across America are getting and have been given is that they're expendable. And I'll tell you, at first I think there was shock, and then I think there was anger, and now we're turning to dramatic action.
The UAW expects VW to officially recognize the union, with an announcement paving the way for that recognition coming as soon as this week. A letter to UAW Local 42 members from local president Mike Cantrell was leaked to both the AP and the Wall Street Journal. In the letter, Cantrell said the local is waiting for details from the company about the announcement. The local was formed despite the UAW having narrowly lost an NLRB election at the plant earlier this year. The UAW says more than half the workers at that plant have now signed up. The leaked letter said the UAW expects VW recognition based on discussions in Germany last spring. The VW announcement is supposed to be a policy change that would clear the way for UAW recognition. The UAW and VW reportedly agreed last spring that the company would recognize the union. The union agreed to help win production of a new SUV at the Chattanooga plant and to drop its NLRB challenge over the earlier election. The Take Back Chicago Coalition rallied Tuesday and marched to the Chicago Board of Trade to call for action on economic initiatives supported by Chicago voters. The activists want state lawmakers to pass an Illinois minimum wage of $10.65, a $15 an hour City of Chicago minimum wage that includes domestic and tipped workers, an elected representative school board to give Chicago parents a real voice in education, and immediate reform of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Workers Independent News is new by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of health care and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
NAFTA, gotcha, we are being fun. NAFTA, gotcha, every time we buy. NAFTA, gotcha, we are the search.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Look, you go back 20 years ago, we passed NAFTA under the idea that it's going to create jobs. And, as I've been saying, on a visceral level, I think we all have finally figured it out. It's not. Even 20 years later, we're still losing jobs. In fact, as I said the other day, almost 1 million certified TAA jobs were lost under the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. They've certified almost 1 million jobs lost just because of NAFTA. And to me, that's not what we were promised. And the same goes with this Trans-Pacific Partnership thing. This, again, to me, we're being told, it's going to create jobs, it's going to do all these wonderful things. Sure. I'm here to talk a little bit about it. I've asked Amy Conahan. She's director of the Pennsylvania Fair Trade Coalition. Amy, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, thanks, Rick.
So I look at this, and I got to be honest with you, Amy. I cannot believe that we still have to have these conversations on why these massive trade agreements are bad for workers in this country.
I totally agree with you. I just want to make a point real quick. I've heard on your show all week. I've been listening in, and I keep hearing the question: are we against trade? And that's no, we're not against trade. We're in a coalition that's nonprofit. We're not Democrat or Republican. We're nonpartisan. All levels. We do not reject trade. We're just asking for a level playing field and for it to be fair. So this Trans-Pacific Partnership is, like everyone keeps saying, it's another NAFTA on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, we in this country, we've traded from the beginning of time. From the beginning of this country, we've had trade policy. It's only been, in my understanding, the last 25, 30 years that we've been getting our hats handed to us, because the last time as a nation that we had a trade surplus was 1975. To me, there's something wrong with the people who are negotiating, or it's a different focus on who we're negotiating for, Amy. I don't think it's folks like you and me that the negotiators really care about.
No, oh, definitely not. It's the big corporations that are profiting in these deals. It's the working middle class people like you and I that are not benefiting. And I said that's why it's so important this week that we all stand up in unity and we work together to urge our members of Congress to do the right thing on the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right. So there are two issues here, right, Amy? There's the agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade agreement that evidently the president is, I was told he wasn't going to be negotiating, but evidently they are. And then there's the fast track authority. That right now that this week of action is put forth to make sure that we don't give this president, or in my view, any president, fast track authority, right?
Right. That's why it's important that we stop this now, the fast track.
So explain what fast track is for those who, I can't imagine there's anyone who doesn't know by now, but for someone who may not know.
Right. So fast track, the definition of fast track is that when the president of the United States negotiates an international agreement, that Congress can actually approve or disapprove, but they cannot amend it. So once it's passed, there are no changes or amendments that could be made. So we're stuck basically with what's in it.
And that's not a good thing, because I look at the last one and not so thrilled. But let me ask you this. Is fast track something new?
No, it's been around for some time now, and we've stopped the fast track fight in the past. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it was in 2007. So here it is again. If we just keep fighting, we know that this is something we can beat. And it's really important that if we stop fast track, there's a huge possibility we can stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were going to say something.
So if it's okay, some people might not know what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is, unless they've been listening to you this week, Rick, because you've been really highlighting the importance of this. And people call it the TPP. That's the abbreviation, Trans-Pacific Partnership. But it includes us, the United States, and 11 other nations. So that's 40% of the global economy that would be involved in this trade agreement. And basically, there's so many negatives to this agreement if it's passed. Another point is new countries can come in and join at any time, so that would be more of the global economy. And it's just making it easier for big corporations to ship our jobs away, and that's what's important here. That we have our jobs, and what we've seen from NAFTA, it's been devastating. We've lost hundreds and thousands of jobs.
And what's interesting to me, and the reason I asked about if fast track was something that's new, and the reason I ask about it is because it's one of these things, as I understand, came up due to the Trade Act of 1974. Which is interesting. And the reason I brought up 1975, the last year the country had a trade surplus, is because my view that it's these kind of agreements and this kind of lack of transparency that has really harmed the American worker, and why I think the ability to amend these deals in Congress, which is supposed to be their job, but to be able to do these things is so vitally important. And also, that's how we used to do things for 240 years.
Right, and the thing with the TPP also is there's a lot of secrecy going on. Like us, middle class working people, and just the public in general, we deserve to know what's going on behind closed doors. And it seems that with this deal and the past trade deals, it's the big corporations and the top 1% that know what's happening when these deals are being negotiated. And we're just not part of the process. Companies like Walmart and Chevron, they're involved. They have access to the text of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But the public, we deserve the right to know what's in these texts.
So you're not one of the 600 traded, quote unquote, trade advisors who get to be intimately involved in negotiating what the other 310 million of us have to live under?
That would be really nice, and then I can relay the information to all you folks.
No, because I think it's important. I mean, to know that these quote-unquote trade advisors, who we used to call really high-paid lobbyists, they have so much power and so much control. And what's frustrating to me, Amy, is this president was supposed to be, in his words, the most transparent president in history, yet this doesn't look anything like transparency to me. And listen, I voted for the guy. I support a lot of the things he does. This ain't one of them.
Right. I mean, the realization is that the TPP is being written in the corporation's interest, and they're not paying attention, or they have no regards for the working families, the public health, the environment, food safety. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We heard several years back when I first started getting involved in this movement, when the baby bottles were poisoned. There's toxins in our products, and it's because there's not the right regulations aren't being put in place with these trade deals. We need better stipulations in our deals that, we can protect our own and protect the people around the world from, things like toxic products or our food being poisoned.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. Melamine in the baby formula, the same melamine they put in the dog food that killed several thousand pets across the country. Not to mention the drywall that came in that made thousands of people sick. You're right. There's so little oversight and so little of what comes in gets inspected. In fact, if you look at our trade with China, so much of what we only, I think, inspect something like 1 to 1.5% of everything that comes in, and that 1.5% that we send back, you got to know it's coming right back again anyway.
Right. And I did look into the seafood safety, where our inspectors in the United States, the number, and I don't have it at the top of my head, but the number of inspectors to how much food they have to inspect, it's nearly impossible that it's all being tested properly. So our food's not going to be safe. So that's why it comes back down to these trade deals.
Yes.
The issues are us, our kids, our grandchildren, just the working middle class people, our safety. And that's why my heart's in this movement right there, is because even as a parent, we have children and someday hopefully grandchildren, and they're going to have to deal with all this if we don't make a change now.
I'm right there with you, but there's hope, right? I mean, we can stop this. This isn't a done deal.
Right. So there's things we can be doing, and this week of action, it's going on not just in the United States, around the world, around the globe this week. The mobilizations are in Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Malaysia, and the U.S. If we continue to speak loudly enough, we can derail this fast track. And if we just have to keep pushing our members of Congress, there's a few things that we can do by contacting our members of Congress. It doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or Republican. It's as simple as, there's a website, stopfasttrack.com. You can go on, put in your zip code, and you can be directly connected to your member of Congress. It's as simple as saying, please, can we get you to oppose fast track, or will you oppose fast track? There's talking points on the website. There's a way to send an email to them. You can ask your organization, if you're part of an organization, you can send out an email blast, getting your members involved. There's also a way to write letters to the editor. But get this out on the internet and in the newspapers. A lot of the general public aren't aware or knowledgeable on these issues until they see it. So getting them to write letters to the editor makes this topic known, and it makes people really start to care.
Or just do as I've been saying. Just call your congressman and say, no!
That's it. I've been hearing you say that, and that's all we need you to do is, just make a simple phone call, hit send on a simple email, and get them to commit.
Exactly.
And then we got to holding them accountable too.
Or better yet,
holding them to their word.
Or better yet, if you're in Allentown tomorrow, you guys are having an event at Charlie Dent's office. Maybe show up at your local representative's office, knock on the door, and say no.
Right. Yeah, there is an event tomorrow. It's going to be at, like you said, Representative Dent's office, who's not said he was going to oppose fast track. It seems he's more supportive of it. So we're demanding. We're going out with signs, and we're demanding that he stands up and comes out against fast track. And we don't want another NAFTA-style trade deal. It's at noon, and it's in his Allentown office. And feel free to come out. There'll be a bunch of different labor activists and environmentalists and various society groups there, and we'd love to have you.
There you go. And I think getting out and looking at them face to face is very important, and their staff people as well. In fact, the staff people should know your name. That's the way it should be going. Because you're right. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about our jobs. This is about the future of the middle class of this country. Right. And, the reality is these trade agreements were mostly negotiated under Republican presidents and sadly signed by Democratic presidents. So there's bipartisanship. Maybe the Kool-Aid somewhere in the White House. I don't know, but we got to put the Kool-Aid away.
Right, I agree with you. Yeah, any support we can get in contacting either member of Congress, Democrat, Republican, try to get them on our side. That's what we're asking for people this week during the National Week of Action.
And that's what we should be doing. If you want more information on this week of action, stopfasttrack.com. But if you also want some information on Amy's group, the Pennsylvania Fair Trade Coalition, you can go to citizenstrade.org. They've got a link there, I believe, to the site. And if not, just go to thericksmithshow.com, click on Amy's name. It'll take you right to their site where there's plenty of information and things that you can be involved in. Amy, I appreciate the work you guys do. I appreciate your time. Keep up the fight, and we will win.
All right. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Farm no more.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is Your World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, the leaders of Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. A high court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan into South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan in 2011. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WFP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we would rely less on the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been covering the story of how the Star-Spangled Banner became America's national anthem sort of by accident. Francis Scott Key had found himself held on a British ship that was part of an attack meant to destroy Fort McHenry and the city of Baltimore in 1814. Inspired by the beauty of the American flag flying in the midst of loud and bright bombardment, he wrote the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner. Many today think he wrote the music also, but he never had a tune. He put the lyrics to an already existing melody. And also not known to many, he wrote 4 full, beautiful verses. Still, we only sing one verse today. The first step to becoming our anthem was that it was instantly a very popular song. Join us again next time for the big boost for Francis Scott Key's lyrics becoming America's national anthem. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between the rock and the hard place, and I'm down on my luck. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Speaking of down on his luck, wow! I just saw this this divorce settlement, and divorce is never fun, but this is kind of funny and good for him. Multi-billionaire Harold Hamm. For those fracking folks, the people who despise fracking, he's one of your head guys. According to Forbes, or according to Time magazine, they said that he made his money the old-fashioned way. He fracked for it. In fact, he's worth about $14 billion, according to Forbes. Anyway, according to a ruling filed in Oklahoma Monday, the CEO of Continental Resources, Mr. Hamm, he evidently owes his wife, Susan, $481,842, almost $1 billion in the divorce settlement. They've been married since 1988, and that's the division of property that she was supposed to get because the fracker, who knows why. None of my business, but kind of interesting that there's that, and then there's the vast majority of the people who in this country who are struggling and around the world. And I looked at the Agency France press story that, according to Oxfam, they're a anti-poverty group. They've said that the world's largest economies, they have to tackle this rising inequality. They have to figure out how to not have so few controlling so much while so many are without. In their report, just ahead of the G20 summit in Brisbane, Oxfam said the wealth of the G20 nations has risen by $17 trillion just since December, but that the richest 1% of the folks took more than a third of that. Just for themselves, line the pockets. They say in their report, inequality in and of itself is problematic for those who are left behind, but we also know that you can't actually achieve growth unless you address the issue of inequality. And, we've been hearing an awful lot about inequality, and what they're calling for is a global tax system. So that you don't have these huge multinational corporations who are hoarding money in these poor countries. and paying off a dictator or paying off the local politicians with a couple of pennies to store billions and billions of dollars, because it's not only costing us here, it's costing those countries as well. And for me, there's a lot of this that I think is very important. And there was an Economist report just this week that looked at a new paper by Emmanuel Saez of the University of California, Berkeley, and Gabriel Zuckman of the London School of Economics that says, inequality, it's approaching record levels. We're getting to the point to where inequality has never in this country been greater. According to Saez and Zuckman, they look at the total share of wealth held by the bottom 90% of folks in this country, relative to those at the handful at the very top, that 1%. They point out that in the late 20s, the bottom 90% held just 16% of America's wealth, considerably less than held by the top 1%, which controlled a quarter of the total wealth of the nation up until the crash of 29. And they go through a number of these graphs, really nice infographics that really point out that you look at the reason we passed an income tax and the reason that we passed an estate tax back in the 10s. 1913, the income tax, and of course, the estate tax just after that. The reason we did that was to try and close the gap between the 1% controlling more wealth than the bottom 90%. And they chart this whole path to where, and they walk you through decade by decade, what policies we pursued and what they did. To me, the wealth creation that we've seen in this country by the handfuls over the rest of us is a matter of policy. I mean, you go to the golden age where, you saw a broad building middle class, or at least the 90% sharing in the wealth. And it was policy. It was taxation. It was investment in things that allowed people to buy homes and build wealth, and not with schemes and gimmicks and ways to steal them back, but actually true good policy to help them build wealth. And as it points out, 1978 was the peak year for basically you and me, but the bottom, the trough, if you will, for the 1%. And that they had held just 7.1% of the wealth. I mean, it's amazing. And then you bring us to today, where we've come almost full circle from the 19 teens until today. We're almost now at the point where the top 1% has more wealth and controls more wealth than the bottom 90% of us. And I argue it's policy. It's our tax policy. And, the decline started in the 60s, thanks to John F. Kennedy with passing tax cuts for the very wealthy, and made its way all the way to Reagan. And then, they accelerated during the Reagan years. And you can see the constant gain of the 1%. And, of course, where there's gain on the 1%, obviously, the rest of us are the ones that suffer as well. So I find it interesting that, here we are, with this Oxfam saying globally we got to do something about inequality, or we're going to get stuck in a lack of growth, a stagnant economy globally, which that's not good either. But just interesting stuff to me. When we come back and talk a little bit about, I talk often about deregulation not being real deregulation. It's more like re-regulation. Well, this group, Citizens for Effective Government, or the Center for Effective Government, they've got a new report out basically saying just that. We're going to talk about that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's Tuesday, November 11, 2014.
Time is not on our side.
The final United Nations Climate Change Report.
We have the means to limit climate change and build a more prosperous, sustainable future.
Good news, there's still hope. Plus, flashback.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways.
To when conservatives accepted science.
Margaret Thatcher is a left-wing tree-hugging pinko. All of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The Environmental Committee, currently run Barbara Boxer, replaced by probably James Inhofe.
Yes, the global warming believer is out and the global warming skeptic is in. So finally, the Environmental Committee can focus on important issue like who's stealing all our polar bears?
Yeah, what about that? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, while we have been mired in the election over the past week or so, and looking forward to the U.S. Senate Environmental Committee being taken over by Senator James Inhofe, America's foremost climate change denier, there was something else going on at the UN, and of course, it was getting buried by the election.
Well, yeah, the United Nations released its final climate science report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2 days before the midterm elections. This report is more blunt than ever. The planet is warming. More than half is due to human activities, and the implications for the future are serious and require urgent action.
Climate change will leave no part of the world untouched by the impacts. Human influence on the climate system is clear. The more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts.
Severe, pervasive, and irreversible. That was the chairman of the IPCC, Rajendra Pachauri, at the press conference for the release of the report.
Or as we call him around here, Mr. Chuckles.
This is the IPCC scientists' final synthesis report, the culmination of 3 previous monster installments over the last year on the science of global warming, the impacts, and the solutions. The key warning, we've already burned 2/3 of the way through our carbon budget. That's the maximum amount of carbon we can burn if we want global temperatures to avoid going over 2 degrees Celsius. That's about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial temperatures.
And that's by just the end of the century, right? The goal is about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep it from going over that before the end of this century, right?
Right. The IPCC warns we must ramp down to zero emissions by 2100.
Zero emissions?
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Now, most importantly, according to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, there is hope.
The good news is that if we act now, immediately and decisively, we have the means to build a better and more sustainable world.
Now, the IPCC finds that we already have all of the technology we need, and action on climate change is much, much cheaper now than dealing with the consequences will be later.
We have all the technology we need to get to zero emissions by the end of the century?
Yes, we do. But time is running out, according to American scientist and IPCC author Dr. Michael Oppenheimer on CBS News.
We have a small window of opportunity the next couple of decades where we can slow this thing down and start to reverse the trend.
In other words, the longer we wait, the more difficult and the more expensive it will be. Now, to that end, final negotiations on an international emissions reduction treaty will occur in Paris in December 2015. And of course, any such treaty obviously doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of being ratified by a hostile Republican
Gosh, I wish we had warned people about that.
So, State Department negotiators are reportedly pursuing treaty mechanisms that don't require Senate approval.
Treaty mechanisms?
Yeah, like going through the Montreal Protocol, for example. That's the world's first international climate treaty to repair the ozone hole.
A treaty that has already been approved by the U.S. Senate.
Oh, yes. Finally, Saturday, November 8th, was the 25th anniversary of the very conservative British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's speech to the United Nations, urging action on climate change.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways. The problem of global climate change is one that affects us all, and action will only be effective if it's taken at the international level. It's no good squabbling over who is responsible or who should pay. Each country has to contribute, and those countries who are industrialized must contribute more to help those who are not.
And funny thing is, President Ronald Reagan agreed with her. That's the world we used to live in.
Of course, Thatcher's speech at the UN has gotten somewhat lost to history since the very next day, the Berlin Wall came down.
Yep.
For much more on all of our stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our twice-weekly reports anytime via iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
If I could turn back time, if I could find a way.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Come on, ya good workers, good news to you I'll tell. About the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So during our week of action, as we fast track authority, I also thought it'd be a good idea to talk about, some of the, we hear an awful lot of talk about government regulation, especially on the right. We need to deregulate everything. And I've often said, look, we're not deregulating anything. We're just re-regulating. We're rigging the game so that the handfuls, they have more. Much like these trade agreements that we've been talking about all week. It's a major power shift. Who gets what? And to me, this is another one of those moments. And there's a new report out released today by the folks over at the Center for Effective Government that looks at these trade associations and their corporate lobbyists and all of the work that they do to influence the rulemaking process and and I would argue the regulatory process as well, which is why I've asked Ronald White. He's the director of regulatory policy over at the Center for Effective Government. Ronald, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So I look at this and I go, it's a good study. Well done, well written. But I don't know that there's much there that we don't know, right? I mean, basically, this is the big fish always eating the little fish.
Well, yeah, in this case, it's really the big fish pretending to be little fish and influencing the process by which these federal regulations, these federal rules actually are being developed. So this is an investigation of a relatively little-known requirement that came out of a mid-1990s law that says that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and more recently the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, all have to go through a review process for their regulations if their regulations are going to impact small businesses. And they have to develop input from small businesses and then consider the comments that they receive, and if they feel it's necessary, change their rules to try and mitigate these impacts on small businesses. What we found in our study is, in fact, that big business has hijacked this process, has actually infiltrated the process of submitting these comments and input to these federal agencies, and they're doing it through a little-known part of the Small Business Administration. It's actually an independent office within the Small Business Administration called the Office of Advocacy.
And who are these people? I mean, when you look at this, are these the big corporate lobbyists? What are we seeing? Who are we talking about specifically?
So we're looking at the major trade associations in many cases for a lot of the industries that are going to be affected by these rules. For example, when we're talking about EPA rules on power plants, you're talking about the Edison Electric Institute, which represents the big electric utilities. When you're talking about OSHA rules to reduce the impact on workers of exposure to cancer-causing chemicals like hexavalent chromium, which is a very dangerous cancer-causing chemical. There was a subdivision of the American Chemistry Council called the Chrome Coalition. They were a major player in in providing input and deciding what representatives ought to be involved in this process to provide input to this review process. So we're talking about big business, major players that are part of this process. Sometimes they actually are official representatives that provide input to these recommendations, and sometimes they're listed as quote unquote helpers to the process. So they get to be involved in the entire process. They actually help draft the comments that get submitted to the panel of the federal agency that's involved. So that would be EPA, OSHA, or the CFPB. And this Office of Advocacy that I talked about within the Small Business Administration actually sits on this panel. But we also found that this Office of Advocacy helps industry draft the comments that they're then reviewing as a member of the panel.
No way. No way.
Yep.
They weren't actually. Come on. I thought the comments were supposed to come from the people, from the small businesses themselves, right?
That's right. They are. They're supposed to be from the small businesses themselves. So not only does this Office of Advocacy actually help decide who submits the comments to them, because they actually go to the trade associations and ask the trade associations to suggest the folks who are providing the input as quote unquote small businesses, but then they actually help organize and help the quote unquote small businesses actually draft the comments that they then sit back and review as a member of the review panel. And those reviews actually produce recommendations that in some cases we found led to weakening the public protection rules that these agencies were then issuing.
So let me ask you this. I mean, in talking about the chemical exposures with OSHA, aren't they the same between small businesses and large corporations on how we handle those chemicals and what workers are exposed to? Aren't they the same?
Well, in fact, there are,
or at least aren't they supposed to be the same?
They're supposed to be the same, but in terms of the level of the standard that is supposed to protect workers. Now, sometimes there are differences in terms of how quickly a standard has to be met by small businesses versus large businesses. Sometimes there are other accommodations that agencies try to make to recognize that sometimes small businesses need a little bit more time or need a little bit more flexibility. But the bottom line is that the actual standard, the level that's protecting worker health, or in the case of the environment, air pollution, for example, those standards are the same whether we're talking about big companies or small companies.
Okay. Because, the way I'm looking at this is, to me, the way you've laid this out, it sounds like this is big companies acting like small companies, gaming the system to put the small companies out of business.
Well, I think what's happening is that the big companies are basically trying to get another bite at the early bite at the apple that they then ultimately get anyway, because all of these rules go through then once the agency actually comes out with the rule as a proposal, these big players come in and utilize their extensive resources to submit, hundreds of pages of comment to the agency. They show up at all the agency meetings. They hire consultants to basically argue their arguments both on the science side and on the technology side and on the cost side. So they have plenty of time to weigh in on these rules. But what here they're getting is an extra bite at the apple to get in even before these rules are actually proposed by the agencies. They find out what the agency is actually thinking early on by basically masquerading or infiltrating this process as a small business.
That's interesting, because one of the questions I had as I was looking through the material is how much of this is lazy regulators, lazy people just saying do our work for us, and how much of it is the swinging door between these regulatory bodies and these big businesses, because folks seem to come and go between industry and oversight, which I don't know is such a good thing.
Well, that's true. So in terms of your first point, we actually are recommending that the agencies really require that the small businesses that they select to serve as to provide input on these panels actually verify in writing that they qualify as a small business. And right now, the agencies do some ad hoc verification. They might call or email a company and say, provide us with some information on your number of employees or sales. But there's nothing here that they actually have to verify in writing that says, yes, we meet the requirements of being a small business. So that's one of the recommendations that we have in our report is, in fact, that these agencies actually have to get these companies to verify in writing that they are actually small businesses that are going to be impacted by these rules.
Yeah, I mean, but wouldn't you think that would be already in place? And I guess defining what a small business is the first part of that, right?
Right. Well, and there's a real difference here. For example, most people, when they think of a small business, they think of a company that probably has at most something like 100 employees. That's not the case with the definition of a small business that the Small Business Administration uses for its grant programs. And those are the same definitions that is used for this review process that we've just been talking about. So you can have companies that have 1,500 employees, depending on the industry, qualify as a small business and be in a position to provide input. And what's more insidious is that you have these trade associations that say, well, we have big companies in our trade association, but we also have some small companies. So we're going to be here, and somehow we're just going to, represent the small companies, which in fact is just ridiculous, because really the folks that call the shots in these big trade associations, the ones who really provide the funding, are the big companies.
Right. Because most of my friends think that the local chamber of commerce that's full of the local shopkeepers and the restaurant folks. Because when I think of small business, Ronald, I think of the guy I know who employs 2 or 3 people at the little shop, or employs a couple of people who a handful of people. I don't think 100, 200. That's a lot bigger than small business in my mind, and I got to think most people think that way as well.
Right. Well, again, most people think of a small business maybe like up to 10 employees. That's sort of like, if you go out to the street and you ask people what's a small business, they'll say probably an operation that has, 10 or less employees. Sometimes, depending on who you go to, again, there have been some surveys out there that seem to, that would suggest that, you can even maybe expand it up to 100, and that's obviously at the high end. But again, I mean, we're talking about companies that in some cases are subsidiaries of much larger companies that get in. And then you have trade associations where we've documented, we actually have email documentation that say, to tell this Office of Advocacy, we're not a small business, we don't represent small businesses. And the Office of Advocacy is saying, well, don't worry about it. You can be involved in this process. You'll just be a helper. And what they mean by a helper is basically you'll help these small business folks who are basically, from their perspective, these folks are just too busy and they don't have the technical capability to understand all this stuff. So you guys will just draft all the comments for them and just submit it. They'll submit it under their own name.
Yeah, I don't think that's what I don't think that's what it was meant to be, was it? I mean, because as I'm looking at this, it sounds on paper like a good idea. We want to have small business input. We want to have the little local guy having some say in the rules that happen. It just sounds to me that this is just run amok.
Absolutely, this is basically. I mean, the original concept was to have actual small businesses who are going to be directly impacted by a federal regulation or rule, provide the agency with some input on what those impacts might be, and then how the agency might help mitigate those impacts on those specific small businesses that would be directly impacted by the rule. That's been completely distorted and manipulated in this process as it's currently being implemented.
So outside of of defining what a small business is and having specific written eligibility criteria, what else should we be doing? And is this something that we, the average Joe, Rick Smith, or our listeners can be involved in? I mean, this sounds like very technical stuff.
Well, it's technical, but the agencies can certainly hear from folks in the public saying, we've heard about this. This process is totally lopsided now. It's totally distorted. Big business has taken over. You guys really need to get your act together in terms of verifying that the folks who are providing input to you through this relatively esoteric, unknown process are actually really small businesses, and that who you're hearing from are legitimate small businesses, not these big trade associations or their surrogates. Also, this Office of Advocacy is an office within. It's actually an independent office. So the Small Business Administration administrator has no control over this office. It was set up as a completely independent office within the Small Business Administration, and they've run amok for a long time. In fact, my organization, the Center for Effective Government, issued a report about almost 2 years ago at this point, in January of last year, showing that this same office had actually involved itself in basically serving as a surrogate for big business views on the scientific assessments of cancer-causing chemicals that EPA and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences were reviewing from a scientific technical point of view. So that was not a small business. They weren't representing small business there. They were actually representing big industry and serving as another vehicle, another conduit for big industry to weigh in on these scientific assessments. So this isn't the first time that we've seen problems with this Office of Advocacy serving the interests of big industry as opposed to real small businesses.
Yeah, I would argue top to bottom, our government seems to be controlled by big business and with the regulatory process on their side at the peril of small business. If you want to read the report, Gaming the Rules, How Big Business Hijacks the Small Business Review Process to Weaken Public Protections, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Ronald White's name. It'll take you right there. Ronald, I appreciate you taking time for us. The last question I've got for you, how do we go about this? Let's say somebody wanted to make a comment. Is there a way of doing that outside of, checking the internet or flipping through the phone book? How would we go about that?
Well, actually, at the bottom of the webpage where our report is posted on the centerforeffectivegovernment.org website, there are links to all three of the agencies that we've just been talking about for folks to be able to click there and leave comments to the agency on trying to address this problem with this process.
Now, they won't be rewritten by corporate people, will they?
No, those are an opportunity for them to send their own. It's just a link to the email comment sites for these various agencies.
All right, so actually living, breathing human beings can make a comment. There you go. Ronald, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Rick. Thank you.
All right. Again, the report, Gaming the Rules, How Big Business Hijacks the Small Business Review Process. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Ronald White's name. It'll take you right there. He's the Director of Regulatory Policy over there at the Center for Effective Government. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Just have to leave. Unemployment runs out after just 6 weeks. How does it feel to be a budget cut? You're snipped. You no longer exist. And I'm the first possible good. So we can bring the fashion to a little love. See our chart, unemployment's going down. Everyone's your life, it's our problem. Super score.
A bumper sticker from around 2008 offered a stinging forward response to the Bush-Cheney regime's enthusiasm for the cruel sport of waterboarding. Impeach Bush, it urged, torture Cheney. This comes up again because there's a new push, ironically, coming from the Obama White House to revive torture as an acceptable practice by the CIA and others for their interrogation of terrorist suspects. The irony is that on this issue, Obama himself has taken a firm stand. As a U.S. Senator in 2005, he strongly supported a bill by GOP Senator John McCain to prohibit American officials from engaging in cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of detainees, not just on U.S. soil, but anywhere in the world. Then, in 2009, on his second day as president, Obama proudly signed an executive order banning torture. Good, well done, solid. But a covey of military and spy agency lawyers are suddenly pushing the administration to embrace a loophole that Bush created after Congress passed the McCain bill. Goaded by his snarling, autocratic vice president, George W. claimed that as commander-in-chief, he could override the torture ban if the cruelty took place in detention camps and other facilities on foreign soil. Even though Obama's 2009 executive order directly refuted the Bush overseas loophole, hawkish forces now want the White House to refute its own refutation, giving torture wiggle room and new life in U.S. foreign policy. Unfortunately, the Obamacans are wobbling. But come on, a ban is a ban, a matter of settled moral principle, a statement to the world of who we Americans are. This is Jim Hightower saying, call the White House comment line to tell Obama to stick to moral principle. Call him at 202-456-1111.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
Equality is in play. Workers should organize without haste. Have the vote in your workplace. Work with your manager face to face. Let's go! It's starting again. The change, a new labor age. Support the EFCA. Let's go! It's starting.
I got to tell you, and talking with Ronald there, it's not surprising to me that these agencies that were supposed to help the little guy, that were supposed to help small businesses, have been co-opted and hijacked. Not surprising, and I don't think it's surprising to anyone. This is my problem, and I have people tell me all that. Well, government's bad. I go, no, government's a tool. Government is what you make of it. You get the government you vote for, and I look at the last election, going, we evidently like what we're getting. Which is not good. And you look at this corporate takeover and this corporate dominance. And, as we've been talking about this week about the fair trade, these free trade agreements, we're talking about the regulatory bodies. It all seems this incestuous pool of corporate special interest. And the rest of us are just, we're bickering around the edges. We're fighting for the crumbs. We're fighting over what's left over. And this is where I keep going. At some point, we realize we realize the graft. We realize the gig. We figure out that we're being bamboozled. We're getting screwed. We figure it out, right? At some point, enough, you have to say at some point, right? Because, I look at all of this stuff that we keep seeing, and it's man, the little guy never wins. And to me, that's when you think about the promise of this country and that American dream, that American exceptionalism, that the right loves to tell themselves that they're correct on. That, just because they can thump their chest the loudest, we're great because of that. We can scream, we're number one louder than anybody. But it was that shot that the little guy had. It was that belief that the little guy had a shot. That the working stiff had a chance to make a way in this world. That if you worked hard, you played by the rules. How many times have you heard that nonsense? That you could get ahead, that you could have a good life. And at every turn, every time you turn around, you're looking at another way that these corporate criminals have figured out how to game the system, have figured out how to rig the game. And, maybe I'm just naive to think that, there was ever a time that it wasn't like this. But I got to think that, at this point, these criminals leave nothing behind. At least in the past, they maybe leave something. I don't know. But I look around and it's, and I got to wonder if it's this corporate mentality that's invaded our institutions of higher learning. That every redundancy has to be crushed and every inefficiency has to be destroyed, and there's a war on these workers, and that they're just factors of production that have to be dealt with. I mean, that's what it seems to me. All of these constant mergers and all of this consolidation. That's not, honestly, to me, that's not what this country was founded on. Corporate dominance was definitely not the vision when they took the ink pen to paper and they drafted the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. At least I don't think so. Maybe there's somebody who can make an argument that, well, they believe corporations should be people, Rick. I've had someone tell me that. Maybe it's just me. But, I hear stories like that, and you read reports like that where, you know, this agency that was specifically set up to give the little guy a voice is being co-opted by the big special interest because they pay the higher dues to the trade associations. You know, how many people belong to the restaurant, to the National Restaurant Association? And how many of them are, you know, your local small diner? Probably none of them. No voice for you. Sad stuff. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. Get the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. You can also email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
This is why we fight. Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 18,000 Kaiser Permanente nurses are on strike in California. 600 RNs at two other California hospitals, Sutter Tracy and Watsonville General, are also striking. 400 more nurses at Providence Hospital in Washington, D.C. are striking today. The Kaiser nurses are in contract talks that have broken down. The erosion of patient care is a big issue for the Kaiser nurses. Nurses in 16 states Wednesday will protest lack of proper Ebola preparation. National Nurses United is demanding proper Ebola preparation, training, and equipment, including full-body hazmat suits that meet the American Society for Testing Materials F-1670 standard for blood penetration, the F-1671 standard for viral penetration, and that leave no skin exposed or unprotected. National Nurses United's Roseanne DeMoro.
I want our policymakers, I want our hospitals to tell us which one will 100% protect our nurses, to protect the public. We want something where a virus cannot penetrate anywhere into the nurse's body, from head to toe. The fact is, the message the nurses across America are getting and have been given is that they're expendable. And I'll tell you, at first I think there was shock, and then I think there was anger, and now we're turning to dramatic action.
The UAW expects VW to officially recognize the union, with an announcement paving the way for that recognition coming as soon as this week. A letter to UAW Local 42 members from local president Mike Cantrell was leaked to both the AP and the Wall Street Journal. In the letter, Cantrell said the local is waiting for details from the company about the announcement. The local was formed despite the UAW having narrowly lost an NLRB election at the plant earlier this year. The UAW says more than half the workers at that plant have now signed up. The leaked letter said the UAW expects VW recognition based on discussions in Germany last spring. The VW announcement is supposed to be a policy change that would clear the way for UAW recognition. The UAW and VW reportedly agreed last spring that the company would recognize the union. The union agreed to help win production of a new SUV at the Chattanooga plant and to drop its NLRB challenge over the earlier election. The Take Back Chicago Coalition rallied Tuesday and marched to the Chicago Board of Trade to call for action on economic initiatives supported by Chicago voters. The activists want state lawmakers to pass an Illinois minimum wage of $10.65, a $15 an hour City of Chicago minimum wage that includes domestic and tipped workers, an elected representative school board to give Chicago parents a real voice in education, and immediate reform of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, and I want Congress to pass a set of trade deals. Send a message to Congress to come to an agreement on trade deals.
'Cause they're selling make-believe and we don't buy that here. 'Cause in the real world they're shutting Detroit down, while the boss man takes his bonus pay and jets on out of town. DC's bailing out the bankers as a farmer's auction ground. Yeah, while they're living it up on Wall Street in that New York City town, Here in the real world, they're shutting Detroit down.
And the worst part about it is they're not just shutting Detroit down. No, they're stealing all those workers' pensions. You want to talk about a major screw job. Look at what's going on in Detroit right now. And that's, I got to be honest, that's the future, I think, for many former industrial cities. And I absolutely blame our insane trade deals, which is why I think this week of action to stop Fast Track Authority so incredibly important. Just is what it is. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. It was today, back in the year of 1996. A little bit of history for you. Remember a guy named Chainsaw Al Dunlap? It was today he announced that he was going to fire some 6,000 employees at the Sunbeam Corporation. A little thing they like to call restructuring. Basically just firing people and finding cheaper labor somewhere else. Turns out about a year, within the next several months, they found out that the restructuring was actually a major screw job and nearly caused the company to collapse and cost investors, billions of dollars and workers their jobs and their pensions and all that stuff. But hey, we love our CEO class, right? Anyway, it is what it is. So again, the fast track week of action, things we've been talking about here on the program. And I've been very fortunate to be able to grab people from around the country to talk about the incredible work that they are doing. And I'm glad to have Lacey Kohlmoos. She is a senior field organizer for Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Lacey, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me.
Again, I look at these trade deals and, I got to be honest. You look at cities like Detroit. You look at my former hometown of Cleveland. You look at these former mighty industrial cities, and I can only come to the bad trade deal conclusion that they're not the cities that they once were.
Yeah, that's for sure. People all over the U.S. and, to be frank, all over the world are feeling the crunch from these horrible so-called free trade agreements. It's not, U.S. workers against workers from Vietnam or from Costa Rica. It's the world's workers against these multinational corporations.
And that's an important point to bring up because, I've had some people email me say, well, you're just being nationalist. This is just nationalist rhetoric. And I go, no, I don't know that any workers around the world are going, oh, please, bring NAFTA style trade to our country.
Exactly. I mean, the whole reason that I first got into this whole trade arena is because back in 2007, I was living in a small mountain town in Costa Rica, where half of the community was a small farmer and half was working in a nearby U.S. factory. And the country at that time was trying to decide whether to sign on to the Central American Free Trade Agreement or not. And I became part of the, American perspective on this. And my host father was a small farmer, but a lot of my friends in town worked in the factory. And the factory, U.S. owned, told them that if they didn't vote for CAFTA, they would lose their jobs. And if CAFTA didn't pass, they would pull up shop and move to another country. And even with these scare tactics, CAFTA passed just by a little bit in Costa Rica. And now, about 7 years later, you look at what's going on there, and it's really upsetting. My host dad, he now has to work construction because he can't support his family with a small farm. And my host brother, who worked in the factory, was laid off anyway. And these are the types of things that are happening both in the U.S. and all over the world, where we see these, again, so-called free trade agreements.
Yeah, one of the things that I don't think we talk enough about these free trade agreements is the tearing down of borders. That capital is able to fly wherever it wants, whenever it wants, yet people not so much. And I look at the collapse in Argentina after 9/11 here that we didn't pay much attention to, and how all of the money just fled the country. And all of the immediate disinvestment. To me, that kind of uncertainty and unstable economic setup just is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure. And free trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they try to break down trade barriers, but it's not just about trade. Trade barriers become things like GMO labels, anti-fracking laws, things that we've come to love and cherish here in the U.S. And one of the major ways they do that is through this mechanism called the investor state dispute settlement, which is in the TPP and was also in NAFTA and CAFTA as well.
Yeah, and those are things that I don't think most people grasp. That we're basically giving our ability to govern ourselves away. So this amazing American experiment of self-governance, we're just handing over to these tribunals that we don't even get to sit on. There's no more jury of the peers unless you're a major corporation.
Right, exactly. This investor state dispute settlement, or ISDS. I mean, for those who are worried about corporate personhood, try corporate nationhood. This mechanism would allow foreign corporations to sue our governments in secret foreign tribunals over any law or regulation that they claim affects their expected future profits. And, this is usually where people look at me and think, oh yeah, that sounds like a conspiracy theory, crazy person. But the thing is, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's already happening. Governments have already paid over $3.5 billion to corporations in investor state cases under existing U.S. so-called free trade agreements, like NAFTA, like CAFTA, and TPP. If it passes, we'll be right up there with it.
Who decides what the expected profits is? What they are. If I put money into Wall Street, I'm expecting 1,000,000% return. Do I get that if I sue for it?
It generally comes under the purview of the corporation. They say, oh, this specific law eats into my profits by this much, and then it goes to these foreign tribunals. How they arrive at that number, your guess is as good as mine.
Wow. And again, you go back and you look at this stuff, and for my right-wing Tea Party friends, this is that one world government I think you fear, but it's not really government, it's corporations.
Exactly.
So, in looking at this, and I know there's all kind of activities going on around the country right now as you guys and a number of people are out trying to raise awareness, because this fast track authority, if this goes through and allows the president to negotiate and push through this horrible trade deal, I think could affect millions of workers and cost this country millions of jobs.
Yeah, definitely. The key to stopping TPP is to stop fast track. That's the best thing we can do here in the U.S., and we've been doing a really great job of it thanks to all of the activists all over the country really rising up and going to those protests, making those calls, setting up meetings with their representatives, and writing letters to the editor. These are all amazing things that have really worked. I think that if you had talked to me a year ago today, I would have said, oh yeah, I hope that we don't have fast track. And here we are without any fast track. And it looks like the odds of getting fast track in this year or even the beginning of next year are very, very slim. And that's all because of what activists have been doing and are still doing today.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I've been fearful that this was going to find an easy path through. Because it seems like the political class, who seems owned by the wealth class, it seemed like it was primed to go forward, and I feared greatly the ramifications of that. But I think by having all of these protests and people calling their representatives and being involved, I think it has kind of just tapped the brakes a little bit. I'm hoping to slam on them.
Yeah, I mean, what people have been doing has been amazing, mind-boggling to me. And I work with people in 8 different states, and their enthusiasm, their dedication, their willingness to really go that extra mile has really made a huge difference. And of course, online as well, the stopfasttrack.com website is a great tool for really easily, 5 minutes making a call to your representative. On that site, there's also all sorts of information about different protests and rallies and informational meetings going on in the district. So everybody should check to see if there's one near you. And if there isn't, then
Make
organize one.
Start one. Yes. That's the right answer. Because I look at this and I don't want to. I remember when NAFTA was being kicked around, and I remember I was dead set against it when George H.W. Bush was going to sign it, and as they negotiated it, it sounded like a too good to be true agreement. It sounded like this is going to be major trouble, and it has turned out to be. But I wish I would have done more back then. because I kind of allowed Clinton to con me into. I think like a lot of working people that, we put some halfway labor and environmental standards in that have been nowhere near enough in my view. So in moving forward to this TPP on the environmental and labor front, is there anything in there that protects workers or the environment?
Not really. There is an environment chapter that was leaked a couple months back, and it did have some protections. But the big thing is that it didn't put its money where its mouth was. While we had all these protections laid out, there was no enforcement mechanism. So it was all useless. And in fact, most of the investor state dispute settlement lawsuits that are leveraged against governments have to do with environmental laws. I mean, the corporations are using ISDS to attack laws and policies that protect our clean air and our clean water.
I got to tell you, let me ask, is there anything good in this for working people? I mean, because, everything I keep hearing, people are telling me all of these things and I'm being bombarded. Is there anything good for us as American workers or any other workers?
Really? There's nothing that's good for us, in my opinion. It's really great for corporations, and they're the ones that are driving this forward and kind of controlling the narrative, but we really have to take the narrative back from the corporations. We cannot let Monsanto and Pfizer and Walmart determine our policies, our domestic policies. So we have to really get as many people to call their representatives, because those corporations are the ones that are spending so much money, more money than we can even imagine, on lobbying for Fast Track and for the TPP. But we have been winning against this. It's been a total David and Goliath type of thing going on. And we just have to keep up the pressure. We need to make sure our voice is heard and taken into account. And again, the best way to do that, go to stopfasttrack.com, call your representative, write a letter to the editor, organize a rally. Also, I'm really excited about this because it's my baby. There is a new Fast Track TPP video. You can find it on stopfasttrack.com. Also on the front page, TPP.org, and it's a great way to make your friends pay attention, even if their eyes start to glaze over when you talk about trade.
Did you do that? Did you do that?
I helped organize it.
I mean, it was fantastic. I actually sat and watched it, and I was impressed. And so I expect everybody. StopFastTrack.com. We've got a link at the ricksmithshow.com. It's a way to get right there. Just click name, it'll take you right there. Last line of questioning I've got for you. You look at this and so many people think trade is about just I'm going to give you this widget for that whatnot, and this is much more, as you've pointed out, than this. So after this week of action, where do we go from here? What are the marching orders after this?
Well, really, we need just to always keep up those calls to tell your representative, do not pass any sort of fast track, whether it's this year, whether it's next year. They just need to keep hearing from us over and over. If you've made a call, make another one. If you've written a letter to the editor, write another one and send it out to every single newspaper you can think of. We just have to keep ramping up. And if you want to get creative with some, stunts in the field, then definitely let us know and we'll help you with that.
There you go. And then again, if you want to contact Lacey, I'm sure there's a way over at citizen.org/trade. That there's a way to get a hold of you. Lacey, I appreciate you taking time for us. Keep up the fight. Keep up the great work. I love the video. I'd love to talk to you again at some point in the near future.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I got a picture in my pocket of the lucky one. I'll announce the winner on the radio with my microphone. I do a super show. I wear a cowboy hat. It is my business hat. I'm on till 1 a.m. I must tell you that I'm a man with a mission.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. The High Court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan into South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan in 2011. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WFP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we learn the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been covering the story of how the Star-Spangled Banner became America's national anthem sort of by accident. Francis Scott Key had found himself held on a British ship that was part of an attack meant to destroy Fort McHenry and the city of Baltimore in 1814. Inspired by the beauty of the American flag flying in the midst of loud and bright bombardment, he wrote the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner. Many today think he wrote the music also, but had a tune. He put the lyrics to an already existing melody. And also not known to many, he wrote 4 full, beautiful verses. Still, we only sing 1 verse today. The first step to becoming our anthem was that it was instantly a very popular song. Join us again next time for the big boost for Francis Scott Key's lyrics becoming America's national anthem. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome to the new dark ages. Yeah, I hope you're living right. These are the new dark ages. And the world might end tonight.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. Email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So here's the here's one of those really horrible stories. And again, I go back to the whole there are things about the Affordable Care Act I like, things I don't like. One of them being that we're still entrenching the private industry, private insurance in our healthcare. I look at this story from Wisconsin. This 30-year-old woman who was 29 at the time had a heart attack. And how many 29-year-old people think they're going to go into cardiac arrest and end up in a coma for 10 days? Which is what happened to this poor woman. So she has this event, as she calls it. She went into cardiac arrest. The ambulance came, took her to the nearest hospital, where she spent the next 10 days in a coma. And it turns out that the insurance card she had in her wallet, they didn't bother checking. And I don't know that if I were the ambulance driver and there's a 29-year-old woman, having a heart attack in front of me, that I'm going to worry where I take her. I'm going to go as close as I can. Got to get as close as we can. So that's what they did. Turns out, though, they weren't participating with her insurance that day. So the $254,000 bill that she got from the hospital was only covered of about $156,000 of because she was out of network. Understand that. She's left with nearly $100,000 left in the bill. Now, the hospital said they negotiated it down a little bit, she only owes $50,000. Now, that's a big difference between $50,000 and the $1,500 that she was supposed to pay if she had gone 3 blocks to the next hospital. Now, as she says, look, I was unconscious. I was out. They took me to the hospital, the closest hospital, and thank goodness they did because I'm still alive. But they took me to the wrong hospital for my insurance. So now here's this woman who, she wants to move on with her life because, hey, she made it. She can't get married. She's looking at bankruptcy. As she says, she still has no control over what she's able to do in the future. And, the other part of this is, the Obamacare did add some regulations to require insurance companies to provide better coverage for out of the network. But, here's the thing. Here's this woman, $50-some thousand in the hole. Now, as I understand it, thanks to Obamacare, this isn't going to happen. But here's this woman still, after the fact, screwed. And the reason I bring this up is because we're heading into another legislative session next year where the repeal of Obamacare is going to come up. Now, understand, there are things I don't like about it. This is one of the things I like, that no one's going to file bankruptcy because they got sick. No longer can you see this kind of stuff go on. Now you go, oh, she's just the last one. Yeah, but understand, if the Republicans get their way, if they get their way in this, what happens to this woman? What happens to the next woman like her? I mean, because at 29, I got to be honest, when I was 29, if I had to go out and buy my own health care, I would have bought a high deductible catastrophic plan that just covered, if the worst thing happens. Because how many people think they're gonna have a heart attack at 29? Not many. So here again, I'm thinking about, January's coming. Expect the Republican-controlled Senate and the Republican-controlled House to do some more insanity on the Obamacare front, along with a bunch of other places. And I thought this is one of those stories where you go, could have been me. Could be you. And while the law is not perfect, I would have preferred, much preferred, Medicare for all. Just open it up. Let me buy into it. This is wrong. And it's one of the things that was undone, along with rescission, which is and I don't even think many people knew what the hell rescission was before the whole debate over the healthcare law. I mean, to me, it's just disgraceful that you have a team of folks who they're going to pursue trying to figure out how to go back and screw you out of your health care. It just blows my mind. Absolutely mind blowing. We'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith.
This is the fading American dream. I got the time now, you glorify now. Before I take a job, don't want to go for. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's Tuesday, November 11, 2014.
Time is not on our side.
The final United Nations Climate Change Report.
We have the means to limit climate change and build a more prosperous, sustainable future.
Good news, there's still hope. Plus, flashback.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways.
To when conservatives accepted science.
Margaret Thatcher is a left-wing tree-hugging pinko. All of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The Environmental Committee, currently run Barbara Boxer, replaced by probably James Inhofe.
Yes, the global warming believer is out and the global warming skeptic is in. So finally, the Environmental Committee can focus on important issue like who's stealing all our polar bears?
Yeah, what about that? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, while we have been mired in the election over the past week or so, and looking forward to the U.S. Senate Environmental Committee being taken over by Senator James Inhofe, America's foremost climate change denier, there was something else going on at the UN, and of course, it was getting buried by the election.
Well, yeah, the United Nations released its final climate science report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2 days before the midterm elections. This report is more blunt than ever. The planet is warming. More than half is due to human activities, and the implications for the future are serious and require urgent action.
Climate change will leave no part of the world untouched by the impacts. Human influence on the climate system is clear. The more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts.
Severe, pervasive, and irreversible. That was the chairman of the IPCC, Rajendra Pachauri, at the press conference for the release of the report.
Or as we call him around here, Mr. Chuckles.
This is the IPCC scientists' final synthesis report, the culmination of 3 previous monster installments over the last year on the science of global warming, the impacts, and the solutions. The key warning, we've already burned 2/3 of the way through our carbon budget. That's the maximum amount of carbon we can burn if we want global temperatures to avoid going over 2 degrees Celsius. That's about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial temperatures.
And that's by just the end of the century, right? The goal is about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep it from going over that before the end of this century, right?
Right. The IPCC warns we must ramp down to zero emissions by 2100.
Zero emissions?
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Now, most importantly, according to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, there is hope.
The good news is that if we act now, immediately and decisively, we have the means to build a better and more sustainable world.
Now, the IPCC finds that we already have all of the technology we need, and action on climate change is much, much cheaper now than dealing with the consequences will be later.
We have all the technology we need to get to zero emissions by the end of the century?
Yes, we do. But time is running out, according to American scientist and IPCC author Dr. Michael Oppenheimer on CBS News.
We have a small window of opportunity the next couple of decades where we can slow this thing down and start to reverse the trend.
In other words, the longer we wait, the more difficult and the more expensive it will be. Now, to that end, final negotiations on an international emissions reduction treaty will occur in Paris in December 2015. And of course, any such treaty obviously doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of being ratified by a hostile Republican-controlled U.S. Senate.
Gosh, I wish we had warned people about that.
So, State Department negotiators are reportedly pursuing treaty mechanisms that don't require Senate approval.
Treaty mechanisms?
Yeah, like going through the Montreal Protocol, for example. That's the world's first international climate treaty to repair the ozone hole.
A treaty that has already been approved by the U.S. Senate.
Oh, yes. Finally, Saturday, November 8th, was the 25th anniversary of the very conservative British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's speech to the United Nations, urging action on climate change.
It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways. The problem of global climate change is one that affects us all, and action will only be effective if it's taken at the international level. There's no good squabbling over who is responsible or who should pay. Each country has to contribute, and those countries who are industrialized must contribute more to help those who are not.
And funny thing is, President Ronald Reagan agreed with her. That's the world we used to live in.
Of course, Thatcher's speech at the UN has gotten somewhat lost to history since the very next day, the Berlin Wall came down.
Yep.
For much more on all of our stories today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our twice-weekly reports anytime via iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
If I could turn back time, if I could find a way, I'd take back those words that
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So another interesting story with McDonald's and the coffee. Evidently, a California woman is now facing 21 felony charges of fraud and filing a false injury claim, as she claimed that she was handed a cup of steaming hot coffee with the lid not quite right, that she then spilled all over herself, causing massive burns all over her body. Of course, the pictures of the burns, evidently she downloaded off the internet as she filed her claim seeking $10,000 in judgment for her horrible claim. It just kind of makes you laugh. People, I guess, will try just about anything. And again, no attorney filed this. So the idiot's going, there's a frivolous lawsuit. Please stop. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Ellen Ratner, Talk Radio News Service. Ellen, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much.
So have you ever burnt yourself with McDonald's coffee?
Never.
Never done that? Okay, well, that's good. Well, this woman, she tried to get away with a fake claim by downloading pictures off the internet.
My gosh. And they'll try anything they can.
You got to love people without a brain. So let's find out. Huge story today. We actually landed on a comet 300 million miles away.
We certainly did. Well, the European Space Agency was the first one to do it, but NASA helped. I'm glad they're helping somebody here. As you know, the first manned suborbital flight from the United States was Alan Shepard in 1961. But for those of us that watched it on television, and I did, in school, they put a television, let us watch. I have to tell you, it's quite amazing. The comet, if you see the trajectory of this comet, it took 10 years to get there. It's at the very edge of our solar system, like almost by Pluto, which, as you know, it decides to be a planet or not planet, or we decide to make it a planet or not planet. It goes back and forth. But in any case, it's out there almost by Pluto. So it's a long ways away, and it landed a soft landing today, and I guess we're going to get information from it.
Yeah, I thought Pluto was a dog.
It was a dog. It also was a planet.
There you go. Okay, now it was a planet. Now, not so much. We haven't decided. But 300 million miles away, and I'm going, how exactly are they communicating 300 million miles away when I can't make a cell phone call from the turnpike?
Now, that is a very good question. I do know that if you send an email from Mars, it will take you 20 minutes to get an answer back. But by the time the email gets there and then you get an answer back, And so can you imagine, and Mars is relatively close compared to what it only takes 3 months or 6 months to get to. And this thing took 10 years. So you can imagine, you're right. How are they communicating with these guys?
Yeah, and how are you getting email on Mars? I know people, I've got friends who say you get to certain areas you can't email here in this country, let alone going to Mars.
Exactly. Well, you can't really email from South Sudan either very much.
Well, this is why I truly believe we need to be digging up Harry Truman and the new Electrification Act, just call it the new Wi-Fi Act, and make sure that we have Wi-Fi throughout the entire country, everywhere. Because I got to tell you, Alan, I think even to this day, homes would not have electricity if it weren't for Harry Truman making that a mandate. Because I just think they would, well, we're gonna bypass these areas
right now.
There you go.
Bring them back.
Yeah, let's dig them up. We need something. And judging from last week's election, we definitely need to bring him back just on the messaging front. And I talked about him most of last week. He's famously quoted as saying, you give voters a choice between a genuine Republican and a Democrat who acts like a Republican. They're going to go for the genuine article. And I got to tell you, I think that's what happened last Tuesday. You had too many Democrats running away from being Democrats.
I don't disagree with you, and I think that they didn't stand up for the principles. As somebody in the party who's very high up in the party said to me, we stand for nothing.
Yeah, but the sad thing is, neither do the Republicans. I mean, what they stand for
I understand,
is wrong.
But they come off as standing for something.
Yeah.
What can I say? Do I think the Democrats stand for something? Yes. But it didn't communicate that to the voters.
Right. So what's now that we've landed on this comment that one of the interesting things I read is that they weren't sure if they were going to be able to land on it. The one guy said they weren't sure if it was just going to be like a big ball of powdered sugar that they were going to go right through, which is kind of an interesting frame. If you've spent 10 years of your life waiting for this thing to get there, and then they go, oh, it's just a big powder of sugar.
Well, apparently they were able to land. I guess they have these legs that land. You're right. They had no idea what the composition of this comet was. I don't know how they chose this particular comet, maybe because of where it was in its orbit, but that's what they decided to do.
No, I'm excited to see what comes out of it. Let's talk about the president's trip heading over into the Pacific Rim. There was in China, I guess. Big climate change deal. I understand, huh?
Yes, a big climate change, and Mitch McConnell went after it and said it was basically a giveaway to the Chinese. The left said that it absolutely gives nothing, and so both sides are objecting wildly to it. I don't really know because I don't know enough about climate change. I don't know enough about CO2 emissions to know what is really. But you got to read both sides of the aisle on this one, and then there are Democrats that are saying that this is the best thing since sliced bread, that the president really reached a deal. I just don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely do not trust the Chinese on anything. I think I trust the Russians more than the Chinese, which I think says a lot.
That would say a lot. I'm sure President Putin would be glad to hear that.
Actually, I think I trust Al Qaeda more than or ISIL more than I trust the Chinese.
Well, that's a hard statement.
But I mean, at the end of this, if they agreed to something, there's got to be a benefit for them, because any of these agreements, whether it's our trade agreements or these kind of agreements, it seems like we're always on the losing end of it. And we seem to be giving stuff away.
Well, we do, and the Asian Pacific trade agreement, which you and I just talked about off the air, they are not going to come to any agreement on that. It's unclear in terms of the agreement that the president just came to on CO2 emissions, et cetera. Whether that really hurts American workers, it's unclear.
Yeah, I'm all week we've been talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, which to me, the fast track authority has to be stopped. I want no president to have fast track authority. And look, I voted for President Obama twice. I still don't want him to have it.
Well, I agree with you there, and I voted for him twice. So I think he has some problems with labor in the administration.
Oh, does he? Let's move on. I guess the military is going to host a multinational ISIL-ISIS conference.
They are, and it's going to be at Medill Air Force Base in Florida. And it looks like there's going to be 30 countries participating, 200 representatives. They say a coalition like this has got to win. It is a conference that will happen on the 12th through the 21st.
Are we still mad at Obama for sending a letter to Iran?
I don't know. I guess you're going to have to ask your friends, the Republicans, about that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of friends who go, "How dare he talk to the Iranians?" I go, you mean like how Reagan used to talk to the Russians?
Right, exactly.
Just a thought. Some same-sex marriage stuff down in South Carolina. What's going on?
That's right. So essentially, as you know, I think it was the 6th district said that it was okay. Then locally, the governor and the attorney general said no. And now another U.S. district judge said that gay marriages can begin on November 20th. That would be next week. Now, both the governor, Nikki Haley, and the attorney general have said that they're going to appeal the ruling. This is going to be before the Supreme Court because there's just too much dissension in the state.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, if you're living in South Carolina, you got to be really ticked off at how much money they're wasting on this. I mean, the reality is
I have actually a gay cousin, a lesbian cousin who lives in South Carolina. I'm sure she's not a happy camper.
no, I mean, at the end of this, how much money that we've wasted as a nation fighting just someone else's business. I mean, even if you agree with it or don't agree with it, mind your own business. What people do within the confines of their own four walls with consenting adults doesn't affect me one way or another, and we just need to get on with it. There's too many other things that I think we have to deal with.
For sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about tetanus vaccine in Kenya. What's going on there?
Well, you know, the problem is that anytime you deal with any kind of disease, and I was just told by someone the other day that when they tried to do some tetanus vaccines in another part of Africa, that people thought, well, you know, it's the witch that gets into me if I get tetanus, and how's a shot going to prevent the witch and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it looks as if there are some people in Kenya that are feeling that the vaccine was tainted with a hormone that could cause infertility. They began to freak out. The World Health Organization said they're going to retest, but there's absolutely no truth to it. On this one, my bet is with the World Health Organization.
Yeah, sounds like Elizabeth Hasselbeck and the rest of them here in this country. Same basic idea. Only I would hope that the people in Africa are a little bit more intelligent.
We would hope. But I tell you, it is folk tales die hard in that continent.
Well, I mean, we've got that movement. We've got a movement in this country of vaccine deniers. You know,
I understand.
Yeah, it's the end of the world. From what I've read, we're coming to a point to where now some of those diseases are coming back.
Whooping cough, absolutely.
Yeah, nuts. What's going on in Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine, it's interesting because the Security Council issued a report, and this report basically says that they have seen Russian troops incognito essentially coming in to Ukraine, and there has been sporadic fighting since the ceasefire on September 5th, and that there have been separatist-controlled areas. So it's not a pretty picture, and that was issued by the Security Council. And, of course, Russia's not going to go along with that report.
Yeah, of course. And why would they? Causing enough trouble. Ellen, always great to talk with you. I appreciate you taking time for us there in the wonderful city of Washington, D.C., and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much.
Our good friend Ellen Ratner, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
A bumper sticker from around 2008 offered a stinging four-word response to the Bush-Cheney regime's enthusiasm for the cruel sport of waterboarding. Impeach Bush, it urged, torture Cheney. This comes up again because there's a new push, ironically, coming from the Obama White House, to revive torture as an acceptable practice by the CIA and others for their interrogation of terrorist suspects. The irony is that on this issue, Obama himself has taken a firm stand. As a U.S. Senator in 2005, he strongly supported a bill by GOP Senator John McCain to prohibit American officials from engaging in cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of detainees, not just on U.S. soil, but anywhere in the world. Then, in 2009, on his second day as president, Obama proudly signed an executive order banning torture. Good, well done, solid. But a covey of military and spy agency lawyers are suddenly pushing the administration to embrace a loophole that Bush created after Congress passed the McCain bill. Goaded by his snarling, autocratic vice president, George W. claimed that as commander-in-chief, he could override the torture ban if the cruelty took place in detention camps and other facilities on foreign soil. Even though Obama's 2009 executive order directly refuted the Bush overseas loophole, hawkish forces now want the White House to refute its own refutation, giving torture wiggle room and new life in U.S. foreign policy. Unfortunately, the Obamacans are wobbling. But come on, a ban is a ban, a matter of settled moral principle, a statement to the world of who we Americans are. This is Jim Hightower saying, call the White House comment line to tell Obama to stick to moral principle. Call him at 202.
www.hightowerlowdown.org. Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
He kept me turning up and turning down, I'm turning in, I'm turning right, I'm turning Japanese, I think I'm turning Japanese, I really think so. Turning Japanese, I think I'm turning Japanese, I really think so. Turning Japanese, I think I'm turning Japanese, I really think so.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Jana sent me an email during the break talking about free trade and some of the numbers that I went through, and she, she's questioning the trade assistance, the trade adjustment assistance number. She's actually thrown out a number much larger than the 850,000 that I found. She's saying 1.5 million people have been officially certified by the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. For those who don't know what the TAA is, if they agree that your job was lost due to globalization, due to our trade policies, your company moved overseas because of our trade policy, or moved to Mexico, you then get a whole host of additional benefits. It was one of those things that we said we've got to mitigate some of the really ugly stuff from these trade agreements, which for me, I got to then ask the question, do we extend that to the next agreement? Because if you remember, the Republicans actually were trying to fight back against the trade adjustment assistance. And because those lazy people, they won't work. And I guess it's just one of those, moments where you kind of just look at it and go, this is the mentality of the right wing. This is the mentality of people who don't really care about those who are harmed. And you go back and you look at Pat Toomey, who said, if he had his druthers, when the housing market went boom, we would have had a harder down. Meaning that more people would have had to suffer, because it's in his purest world. Then we would have had a real recovery, because you'd had all these people who suffered. They would have lost everything. And then you start back over again, and well, everything would be pure. And, while on a piece of paper, if you're writing this out, it's fine. When you're talking about real people's lives, that's a whole nother thing. And I don't know, someone with that mentality should be someone that I would want representing, U.S. Senator. But I look at these numbers, and it's one of those things that I remember meeting a guy, and I haven't heard from him in quite some time. Maybe I'm hoping he got a job. He was unemployed for 2.5 solid years. He not only lost his job due to our trade policies, but he lost it right at the moment, just before the collapse, just before the 2008 collapse. And, he was just devastated. So he went back to school, did the 2 years, and still couldn't find a job. And that's part of my problem with the trade adjustment assistance program, is that we go and we train people to, do things, and there are no jobs on the other end. And this is why I've always said that, government needs to be the employer of last resort. You can't find a job right now. You need to be putting your skills to use so that they don't become outdated. I forget where I read it, but I think it said if you're unemployed like 6 months, it's like losing 4 years off your resume. It's like losing a whole bunch of experience in the eyes of a future employer. And as anybody who's ever been unemployed knows, it's always easier to find a job when you've got one. I can attest to that. I mean, there are a couple of times where, I've been short-term unemployed, and finding a job was a nightmare. But when I had a job, I could get one whenever I wanted. It was very, very interesting, but I appreciate the email. And again, if you want to email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, that's how you do it. I do answer all emails personally and try and use some of them here on the air because I like the interaction. I think it's good stuff as we move forward down the line. Question is, do you trust your media outlet? Well, the Pew Research Center sought to find out, who trusted what news organizations they trusted. They looked at the Washington Post, for instance, and found that only 8% of people had used the Washington Post as a source for political news in the last week, leaving 72% who had heard of it but not read it in the past week. So you got 80% of the people that they talked to, we've heard of it. Only a handful have actually used it. And they went down and they looked at the different sources. And they found that, basically the people trusted, what they chose and distrusted everything else. I found that kind of, not all that surprising. It's not surprising to me that the Fox News viewers and the right-wing talk radio listeners, they trusted the people that they listened to, and they distrusted everybody else. Not surprising to me that the people who don't consume Fox News and listen to the Rush Limbaughs of the world distrust them the most and trust them the least. It's not surprising. What is interesting is that there doesn't seem to be any real down the middle of the road organization that most people trust. And I got to wonder if it's just because we've become a distrusting society. I don't know. Or if it's that, we've now divvied up and that we're now on sides. It's like playing kickball in the schoolyard. We've now chosen sides and now we got to fight it out. And it's interesting to me that of the news services that had the of people who did not get their source, the number of people who, and this was just fascinating to me, that Al Jazeera America seemed to have the lowest distrust numbers and the highest trust numbers. Stop and think about that. And Fox News was the most distrusted, even by people who view them. I found that fascinating. Because I got to go, if you distrust them, why are you listening or watching? And I guess part of it is it's good entertainment. I mean, if you're looking for infotainment, if you're looking for just bashing and that, there you go. It's good stuff. Lots of insanity. But leave it to Pew to come up with something to find some interest. They also said that fully 80% of those who had heard of and consumed PBS or CNN say that they trusted it. So CNN high up there on the list, but I was surprised. Al Jazeera seemed to be the, in looking at the information, the one that we distrust the least, and people trust almost the most. It's weird, just weird stuff. Anyway, I hope you've been enjoying our coverage of the Stop Fast Track Week of Action. We're going to continue for the next couple of days talking about this extremely important issue. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the folks who have chimed in. We will see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith. Together, we can make America better. Email